Welcome to this inaugural episode of our podcast. Today we have with us a renowned storyteller, a celebrated performer, and the founder of Jagriti Theatre, Miss Arundhati Raja. In this first episode with Miss Raja, we'll explore the evolution of storytelling and theatre through the ages, and reminisce about the joys of experiencing our own favorite stories. Welcome Miss Raja to the Giddy Goose Show, and thank you for being our guest today.
I'm happy to be here to actually, set this off and thank you for asking me.
Great. So let us get started. As you know, our podcast is all about celebrating stories and storytelling. What are your thoughts on what makes for good stories? And what is the relevance of it all in the current times?
I think the main thing about storytelling, and I stress the telling, in that it is live in many ways. Obviously, we have to not always be live. But when people are talking about, maybe if they're about their experiences, etc., it really doesn't matter because they're talking to you about things that have happened to them, things that they might feel, it doesn't have to always be happy about. Maybe they're angry about something. But those emotions come through when these stories are being told. And I think that's what this whole thing of being able to listen to either someone else's experiences or I'm talking about either someone's personal experiences or someone else's stories that they have written or put in the form of a play even. And I think that it's the fact that we can hear about other human beings and things that are happening in parts of the world that perhaps have nothing to do with us. That is what makes it exciting. And importantly, can continue our lives, continue our stories. If we don't have stories to tell, we would not have so much of general information about how societies were. What about our big stories, our epic stories? Our Mahabharata, your Greek mythology. They are so, they're so evocative of an era. And if we didn't have them, you would not be able to have this excitement, of thought.
Absolutely. That's a great insight. So, what are the kind of stories you grew up listening to? Who are some of the authors or storytellers who have had the biggest impact on you?
I think my experience might be a bit different in the sense that I grew up in the UK. And I left Kolkata when I was 5. I'm a Bengali born there, but I left when I was 5, and I did not come back till I was married in my 20s. So my childhood and the stories and the authors were very much British, but I was of a time of the childhood where I really had one of those. It was one of those. English grammar school education where you were just into I did a lot of reading, but they were English authors. And when I came back to India, I realized how much I did not know of Indian work, right? But going back to what I learned as a child, I have to say Enid Blyton because I grew up with her wonderful stories that kept you, I used to read those books. And then there was Dickens, Thomas Hardy. They were all these kind of Jane Austen, so all these authors. And I'm an only child, so I just read. And I read all these authors. And they had a tremendous, because there is no doubt that the English novel that began all this form of writing, and I can't go into, I'm not a literature graduate at all in any way. But I loved all these stories, and they really had a profound effect on me in terms of, which is why I think that I like the script, a text. I love that there's somebody who writes and has written this story through dialogue. Playwriting is the most difficult form of creative writing because you have to tell a story through people talking to each other. And I think that is such a difficult thing, and which is why you can have so many bad plays and you can have excellent plays, So I think because of that kind of English literature background that I grew up with has made my love of the text, of written plays so well. The fact of being able to actually pick up this script, and to me it's really so interesting to be creative with actors and these characters. okay, they've been created by this one person who sat and actually visualized this story being told through these people talking to each other. So I think that's what laid the foundation for me for my love of a play script. But in other ways that I can't say, unfortunately, because for all that I speak Bengali and I speak a bit of Tamil and all, I can't read any Indian language, and it's not something I'm proud of. So I'm very much, I've read just about lots of stuff in English, etc. So, but I have to say that this is what, and I think it was this English literature which then has made me also now go into scripts that have been translated. This is why I love Girish Karnad's plays so much, because he uses mythological stories or old stories, and he takes them out of their original storyline and puts them into these dramatic plots. And I think that's why I've done so many of his plays, because I find that so interesting. It is Indian in ethos, but they are in English, but still it's fine, because that work can then be, that story can be told and understood by everybody.
Taking a little segue here, do you think the modern forms of storytelling are finding new ways to engage with audiences? And how do you think we can continue to nurture the new generations of storytellers?
I think that one of the many important ways of storytelling is actually through good stand-up comedy. Why is it that certain comedians come through to you and you can listen to them, and if you listen to what they're saying, the most enjoyable are the ones about their lives? It can be about something that happened to them, it can be about their family or their relationship, and or even their response to what's happening politically, but it's personal and they'll come out with it. And I think that is a marvelous way of storytelling. But of course, the comedians have to be very good at it, they have to get their material, they have to know what it is that they're saying.
And in this landscape, where do you think live theatre stands? We know obviously that we have scripted performances, but not everyone knows about street theatre or improv theatre or devised forms of theatre for that matter. As a seasoned practitioner of the form, how do you see the evolution of this form of storytelling?
I think that what has evolved in India particularly, and perhaps to a certain extent in other countries, is a moving away from the script. I call it a script, not a text, because I think that's different. A script is a dialogue, whereas text is not necessarily so. It's one of my things that I have. But the point is that whether there is dialogue or not, what has happened is, I feel, that there are a lot of physical theatre, and I use that in a very broad sense because it can be shown in many ways, has evolved more. And I think that this is because perhaps the way language is being used now, or not in some cases, we're shortening the way we speak and all, but that's kind of a different thing. But what I'm saying is, I think what I have seen in terms of theatre in general, because there's a move away from a script as such, written by a playwright, actors are exploring their bodies and their voices in many ways. And this is showing in the kind of theatre that's being produced. I think it's a very good trend. I think that we have to also watch how we do it, because at the end of the day, you're doing it for an audience. So if you've devised this wonderful script which makes you feel good as an actor, and honestly the audience watching you haven't a clue what you're doing, then we haven't been successful in what theatre is about. But this has been what I have seen as a change. But interestingly, I find just recently, and I think a lot of it is post-COVID, I think that people have begun, theatre practitioners, actors, have begun to pick up, written work, or are writing their own work. So people are beginning to write their own scripts and doing this maybe because we haven't had access to actors, we haven't been able to get together like we normally do. And so a lot more written work is coming out, I feel. And I think that's where we have to look at how that works and how we use it and how it needs to be tested. But that's maybe for another question or another time.
So, a lot of theatre is about what the audiences see, perceive and take away. How important in that context is the visual part of the storytelling experience? How do stories still stay relevant for a format like ours, where we've taken the visual element away? What do you think are the kind of stories we should be telling to our audiences?
Yeah, actually, that's an interesting question, because there's one thing I've always said, and I kind of talk to actors about this when we're having a rehearsal or we begin, saying, all the design element that we can put into whatever we're going to show to an audience. We can take away the lights, we can take away the set, we can take away anything. You can be in a blackout, but we cannot take you away as an actor. And therefore, you have to make sure that whatever you are able to use, your voice, if it's a blackout, that's what you need. Nobody's going to see anything else. So you have to look at what you're doing with your voice. Are you using it correctly? I'm not talking about looking after yourself. That has to be thing. Are you conveying the emotions or reactions that you want to show through your voice as well, and not just through overt physical movement? So I would say you can take an actor and put them anywhere, which is why street theatre works. You don't need anything. You just need an audience and you have the actors. So it's important for us as actors to be aware of this, of ourselves as an instrument of theatre. You can do without everything else. And that's where, when you're doing radio and podcasts, it's so important, because all you're using is your voice. And you can have some help with sound effects and you can have fun doing all that. But if your voice does not carry and does not convey the story, whatever it is, it's going to sound dead. Because just as people say, camera, can tell you the truth, they'll go up to you and they'll know if you're overacting. A microphone will also pick up what is not there. It's not there, it's dead. Your voice is dead, you're not conveying. So I think it's important, and I think we need this now, which is why I think podcasts have become so popular. And I think we don't have enough theatre on radio. I'm sorry, I keep calling it radio, but of podcasts. So I think it's great that you're wanting to do this for theatre particularly, and I think there can be a lot of fun of having radio plays, etc. I think it's important, and I think we can do any kind. We can do an out-and-out comedy. Comedy is always very tough to do, We can do murder stories, murder mysteries, detective stories. It's like a wealth of material.
Now, in this whole gamut of what we're calling storytelling, where does vernacular writing figure? Especially in a multilingual, multicultural country like ours. Especially when the present-day audiences are more glued to consuming content in English or other widely spoken languages.
I mean, this has always been an area of discussion in terms of, because I have over all these years that I've been doing theatre, we've been doing what has been called English language theatre. Began, of course, with plays from the West, and then moved to new writing from Indian plays. And it has been a problem initially. It was that we were not able to actually access the writings in the original Kannada or the Marathi or whatever. And even if you can speak those languages, if you can't read that language, then there's a problem. But now many of the our playwrights have had their works translated. There is a problem there with certain plays, because they're written for people who speak, say, if you're taking a Tendulkar play and it's written in Marathi, and it is really about a Marathi community, and it does not sound right in English. It can work depending on how you treat it. So that became a problem. So when we were still working in English but looking at Indian plays, we had to look carefully at what would work in English, even though the original was there. Am I going off your question? No. All right. So now what's available, although we have so many, there's a lot of work that's being written. A lot of it says that it is Hindi, English mix. And I think what's happened is we've had many plays which have been written really in Hindi, but with smattering of English. A little bit like the way we all tend to speak. In Bangalore particularly, I think we do. Yeah, we'll say something in Kannada, we'll say there'll be some Tamil version, and there'll be English in between. And we've never really had something written like that. You know what I mean? Using those. And it's tough to write because you can't suddenly put the Tamil in and you can just say, this will be said in Tamil or this will be said in, and get the thing. So we have had this Hindi, English couple of plays like that. But we've also had a lot of new writing in Hindi itself. Actually, in English, we've not had a lot. But I think we do have to look at how this is going. I think it's important to be able to use and start writing in English, in languages that can be understood by the many. But I think if we also lose the fact that so many people still understand English, and if someone's sitting there and their Hindi is not that great, but they do know Kannada, but they also actually know English. So if you say something in English, they will understand it. I think we have to look at how we're going to go forward with our work in the different languages. English has always been in the forefront in the South. You could go, and when we first came to Bangalore, it was, if we didn't know Kannada so much because we were more Tamil speaking, but it was Tamil or English. Auto drivers, nobody spoke Hindi. Of course, it's the other way around. So looking at how that has changed, we do have to perhaps look at what our work is like. But remembering, we're not writing only for one city, and English is still spoken and understood in many other cities. And frankly, I would love to see more new writing in English, using maybe the way we speak English, the way our little terms, the way we use things, which I think has not been used enough actually in our original writing in English.
So one question that I've asked others, and I would like to ask you too, is about the role of collaboration across art genres, be it dancers or actors, light technicians or digital media creators, makeup artists or costume designers. What are your thoughts on these collaborations as we explore more innovative ways of storytelling?
Yeah, I think it's important. I think that, traditional Indian theatre, our Sanskrit theatre, etc., has always had music, dance, and dialogue. Always, And I think that we kind of went away from there when there was this introduction of what was called the kitchen sink drama of that time, Joe Orton and your British playwrights, so that it was more within a household and it was more natural kind of story acting in terms of the stories. So we also went through that in India very much when we started, that was what was happening. And now that we've gone away from it, I find that, what I'm looking at and say, the kind of music we use should be important in this, and it would be great to have somebody who could involve dance, or if not dance per se, physical movement. I think it's important. I think it's important if we are to get theatre more, out to a general audience, particularly a public who perhaps would go to stand-up comedy, or who will come to a music concert or a dance performance, but the audiences don't overlap. It's not that if we have a house full for a dance, we will then get a house full for the theatre performance. It doesn't happen that way at all. The audiences don't mix and they don't. But I think that if we can get towards this more kind of collaborative work, it is going to bring in, we do need to work to bring in our younger audiences. I know what gen they are. I have no idea, but younger. And of course, at present, everybody is much younger to me. But I think it's important. I want so much, we all do, all of us in theatre, we want that an audience comes looking forward to a live performance and not think that you can't come and watch theatre because it's some intellectual exercise, so much of it can be enjoyable. And if the way to bring in an audience is to do this collaborative work, which has various different forms, performance arts in it, I think it's a good thing. And of course, I think there, directorially, script-wise, it's tough because you don't want something suddenly to look like, there's a dance in it just for the sake of it, right? if there's a dance, what is it about? Is it necessary to what you're doing at all? So it becomes more difficult, highly interesting creatively, but it requires more work than just saying, look, I think we'll have this dance here. And it can be easy to do that. And then you think, when you're watching it as an audience, you think, but why? The dancer didn't have come on at all. You know what I'm saying? So I think it can be very exciting, and I think it is. I think people are trying to be more collaborative, but it needs to be a longer process. This whole business of the process is so important in this kind of work. So take the time. I think we must take the time for the process to get in the dancers and the musicians and discuss what we can do and work it, rehearse it with actors and everyone, and then put it on for people to come and pay and watch.
I wonder sometimes that watching a performance is one way for audiences to experience theatre. Sure. But do you think we could also create and curate other ways to engage beyond that? Like residency programs, internship positions, and deeper connections with our educational institutes?
I think we have to think about what this program will be. I think I would love to be able to get more workshops together again for young people. There is always a question of what will they then do? And I think we have to try and think maybe that why are we doing it? Okay, is it that we want to get new actors to come? That obviously most likely is not going to happen, because they're going to go on in their life and do other things. But if we can inculcate a love of theatre, then we've done something. So I think if that's how we approach it, and then if they love the theatre, they will try and become actors if they want. We have a program for young people that is a year's program, and they come and they go up through the year, and several of them have joined, because if they've gone to the US, you can't do it here, unfortunately, but they'll be doing some science courses, and they'll also be doing theatre with it, which is great. So I think what I was actually saying, and coming back to that, is I think such programs are needed, and I think that they should be worked out, and we should really try getting some programs done. But to think about what is the aim. If the aim is purely to inculcate a love of theatre and an understanding of what theatre is about and what it requires, more than just being able to speak well and walk across a stage, the actual craft involved and what needs to be learned, then I think we are helping towards an audience, a number of audience increasing.
On a similar note, as entertainers today, we are competing with the content from movies and OTT shows. And of course, a lot of it has become very accessible. In context of live performances though, do you think that this is a challenge or an opportunity for us to stand apart?
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity for us to stand apart. We cannot compete with film. I don't think that we are competitors in that sense, because we're a different art form. It's like saying, I've often been asked, why don't you do street theatre, or why don't you do this form? For me, I like a script-based theatre. That's my liking. I'm not that great myself at devising and doing some. I can devise within a script work, right? That's one thing. But the point there is that we can't compete with the camera. And now from the big, huge cameras, going down tracks, etc., you've come down to a mobile for shooting. And I don't think it matters, because see, we have always had, when we were on stage, when we started, we had no television, and the films that we were getting were not great. I'm talking about Bangalore now. And then movies started coming, TV programs, we opened up with all those new channels and English programs coming. But we still managed to have a theatre. It didn't affect the people who wanted to come and watch theatre. Theatre audiences have dwindled because of other things, people's lives of work, etc., etc. But if we accept, OTT is there, we cannot compare with that, with what you can sit and watch and choose at home. Films also, people said, the film, if it gets, this has come over the years. Theatre, no, it will die because of XYZ, right? XYZ has happened, but theatre has kept going. So I think if we look at it and say, no, we are a part, it's a different art form. In the same way as I started saying this, why don't you do street theatre? Because I like this form. But you would never ask, say, an Odissi dancer, why don't you do Bharatanatyam? you wouldn't dream of it, right? Asking them, because it's different skills. So in the same way, you've got your OTT platform, you've got movies that are coming back into the theatre, and we've into the film theatres, and then we have our theatre, which is live performance, which cannot be beaten by anything, by the camera at all. And radio is not, I think it's very much a partner, because you're using the same skills. It's not live in the sense it's immediately, unless you're doing some live TV show or radio. But the voices, everything, it's kind of live, and you've got nothing else. You've got nothing visual for you. It's just you in your head imagining it, like reading a book actually. Yeah, and you can see the whole scenario and you hear the same thing. So I think that going the way of radio, podcasts, etc., is great, and I don't think the OTT platforms get in the way at all.
Now, as a veteran and a stalwart in the field, what would be your advice to the new generation of storytellers and artists?
I honestly believe that whatever your real interest lies in how you perform, whether you want to do mime, say, or physical theatre in one way or another, and not necessarily have a lot of dialogue to have to deal with. I think that any actor just must read plays. Whether you want to use text-based, and I've used that word, text-based work or not, I think it's so important to read, and to read as many scripts across as possible. If you can read in the original Kannada, do it. Read the English translations of anything if you can't. And I think that perhaps is what is lacking. Not just in plays, across the board, people are not reading as much because everything is at your fingertips visually. So I would really honestly give this one thing, because I think that a lot of actors have access to good training. If you want to go to somewhere like Adi Shakti, or you want to go to Ninasam, or there are places that you can go to, and we have run workshops for actors, etc. But I think that unless you really read the work that has already been written across the board, classical to modern playwrights, and I think that is what will inform you. It'll feed your brain, from which you can then take off and do what you want. And people, honestly, playwrights, there are two playwrights that I would always, Harold Pinter and his American counterpart, David Mamet. Okay, these two playwrights, honestly, whoever's listening, if you haven't read their work, read them. Your mind may think, what am I reading? What are they saying? Go back, because they're writing the way we speak, And Pinter has nothing more in most of his plays than it'll just be pause, it'll be beat, it'll be a silence. And David Mamet writes a similar way. His later work is very crazy, and I can't make head or tail of a lot of it. I'm going to read back. But I just mentioned them. There are many more. So all I can say to young actors, do all the training and the physical work and the workshopping, but read as many play scripts as possible.
Awesome. That is so inspiring. Thank you for those kind words of wisdom. Finally, before we wrap up, please do share suggestions and inputs that you have for our team that is putting together this show. And thank you for coming in. I hope you had a good time.
Yeah, I loved it. I just love talking about theatre all the time anyway. I think it's a great initiative. I really do, because I think it's one good way of taking theatre out to more people, so that then hopefully if you think, look, that was interesting listening to this. Next time there's a play on in a theatre itself, let me go watch. Let's see what this live thing is. And I think if we can do that, if you can do that rather, so I'm really glad that you are doing this. I think it's a step in the way that we've been talking, right, about having to bring in audience to come and watch a live performance. And I know that many people, they watch a live performance, they've never seen it before. And people, when they came back after this whole lockdown business, said it was so wonderful to come and watch people live on stage, and such wonderful stories too. So I think that is important. But I think that the podcast and what you're planning is a really, really good idea. It is a good partner for live theatre.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. In the next episode, we bring an original play for you, a universal yet a very personal tale. The story of a groom on his wedding day, as he looks at the bachelor version of himself for very last time in the mirror and wonders how he got there. Let's find out if he gets his happily ever after. See you soon.